Shalom again, brethren. I'm sharing another lesson study with you all, and this lesson study primarily is going to be dealing with what does Yahuah's calendar look like. I've gotten requests to publish a calendar based on what I would have been teaching about. However, I did not endeavor to publish a calendar, a written calendar, because Psalms 90 and verse 11 says, "Who knoweth the power of thine anger? Even according to thy fear, so is thy wrath." This is David speaking, so bear this in mind. So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts to wisdom. With this said and understood, I internalized it, and because of the fearfulness that we ought to have to Yahuah, which I have, I do not want to go outside of what he has established. Now, as I go on, and the Spirit endows us with more understanding, I may very well be able to publish it. But at this point, what I will do is, I will continue to present scriptural proof, scriptural evidence as to how we can understand Yahuah's calendar and how we are to proclaim his calendar. So the name of this lesson study will be indeed called Yahuah's calendar is proclaimed by his set apart. When we read Leviticus chapter 23 verse 1, it says, "And Yahuah spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them concerning the feast of Yahuah, which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations, even these are my feast. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of rest, and holy convocation. Ye shall do no work therein. It is the Sabbath of Yahuah in all your dwellings." So we can clearly see that these feast days, these Sabbaths, they are holy convocations, and they are to be proclaimed. So now, how do we understand to proclaim these Sabbaths, these new moons, these feast days? Well, the word proclaim is actually Q-A-R-A. That is the Hebrew word. It means to call, to summon, to announce, to be invited as a guest, to be appointed. So we can clearly see from this word that it is something that we can physically do with our eyes. So much so that a child, once he or she is taught, they can understand it and do it for themselves. We can see from the 7th day Sabbath to the 8th day of the Feast of Booths, which is a Sabbath also, that all of the holy convocations of Yahuah are appointed times for his set apart. We are to proclaim all of them that are listed here in Leviticus chapter 23. Now, brethren, I want you to consider this one thing as we go into the study. There's no way that we can proclaim anything that is of Yahuah under Roman, Gregorian, Julian, Constantine, Greco, Medes and Persian, Babylonian, or Egyptian's calendars. These calendars are all idolatrous. They point us to naming the months. They point us to naming the days. Yahuah has only named 3 days and 1 month. These calendars are not of Yahuah. Here is how Yahuah's calendar is seen, understood, and proclaimed. The word proclaim, as we would have learned, means to be appointed. It means to summon, to call, to announce. So we can obviously understand that this is something that we're actually supposed to do. When we read Genesis chapter 1, verse 14 to verse 18, it says that the sun and the moon and the stars are for the dividing of day or light, and for the dividing of night or darkness. The second thing it goes on to say is they are for signs. A sign is a mark, a signal, or an event that communicates. In this case, a supernatural event from Yahuwah. The third thing that the sun, the moons, and the stars were established for seasons, which means moed, meeting or appointment time, is designated. These are appointments that are done by Yahuwah. The fourth thing that we can see from Genesis chapter 1, verse 14 to verse 18, is that the sun, the moon, and the stars, they are for days. And here the day refers to a 24-hour period of the light part and of the dark part, or portions that make up this day. The fifth thing that we can see is that the sun, the moon, and the stars, in conjunction with each other, they are also for years. The years are counted from the month of Abib, which is the beginning of Yahuwah's month, unto us. In today's modern term, it is called spring. The years are started when Abib, which is the first month of Yahuwah's year to us, is announced by the full new moon, which is accompanied by a specific starry constellation. In this case, the constellation that announces the full new moon with the first month of Yahuwah's year to us, Abib, that constellation is called, or it is rather identified in Revelation chapter 12, verse 1. Brothers and sisters, this is homework for you all to find out what is the name of this starry constellation. Is it the Great Bear? Is it the so-called Big Dipper? Is it Bethulah? Is it Pleiades? Is it Orion? These are all starry constellations that are found within the scripture. Who made the sun, the moon, and the stars? Our Ab Yahuwah. As was shared in previous lesson studies, the full moon is new moon. The night before new moon day is full moon, new moon. The scriptures that would have been quoted before would have included Enoch 78, verse 11 to verse 13, Psalms 89, verses 34 to 35, with me making the point that the brothers and sisters need to do the research with regards to the Hebraic etymology, so that the proper understanding will be brought forth to clarify the true understanding of the culture and the context in which these scriptures are written. A Hebraic culture, not a Western culture. The first month of Yahuwah's year is called Abib. Abib, which is the day after the full moon, the new moon. Abib begins the following day. This day Abib is announced when we see the sun is rising in the east on the eastern horizon, in conjunction with the full moon setting in the western hemisphere on the horizon. once we see these two luminaries flashing or facing each other at that specific time, we know that morning when the sun has risen and is on the eastern horizon and the full moon is on the western horizon, we know that that day is the announcement that it is new moon day, the first day of Yahuah's first month, Abib. Abib is the first month of Yahuah's year. The scriptures like Syriac or Ecclesiasticus chapter 43 verses 6 to verse 10, Psalms 104 verse 19, and again Enoch chapter 78 verse 11 to verse 13. These scriptures points us and helps us to understand how the actual moon looks when it is new moon or full moon, to be properly said. Also, when we read in 1 Samuel chapter 20 verses 5 and verses 27 to 28 and 29 and then verses 34, we recognize that these people, David, Jonathan, and Saul, they would have understood that New Moon Day was the first day of any given month of Yahuah. Why? Because they make mention to the fact that on the second day of the month, which is the second day after the first day, which would be New Moon Day. Hence, when we read 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 5, verses 27 to 29, and verse 34, it is clarified that New Moon Day is indeed the first day of Yahuah's calendar. When we read in Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to verse 10, and also in Ezekiel chapter 46, verses 1 to verses 8, we can recognize that New Moon Day was a worship day, because we can see that the offerings that were given on New Moon Day were greater than those that were given on the Sabbath day. We can also see that the temple gates were opened on New Moon Day and on the Sabbath days, the seventh day Sabbath day. The doors to the temple gate, to the courtyard of the temple, were not opened on the 6 work days. So we know that New Moon Day for sure was indeed and still is indeed a worship day. We also know that New Moon Day is the day that Moses would have finished the work that Yahuah put him to do in constructing the tabernacle. This is found in Exodus chapter 40. So we know that we can do work on the first day of the month, New Moon Day, as long as that work is pertaining to the service of Yahuah, nothing else. The first day of Yahuah's first month, Abib, follows the full new moon. The full new moon is always the night before the first day of Yahuah's first month. This scenario, this sequence continues like this into all of the other months that Yahuah has designated to be governed by his moon and ultimately his sun and his stars working in conjunction with the moon to announce Yahuah's appointed times. Ultimately, we know that Yahuah has named one day in his month, the first day of every given month, the New Moon Day. We know that he has given us the 6 work days or the 6 working days, and we know that he's given us the 7th day Sabbath. Notice that these are the only days that we can associate with having names. When we look at the feast, when we take a good look at the feast that are appointed by Yahuah in Leviticus chapter 23, we see that the spring feast, which falls in the month of Abib, and we also see that the fall feast which falls later on, we can clearly see that these feasts are anchored to the moon. They're counted from the first day of Yahuah's month. They're not associated with the Gregorian, the Julian, the Constantine, the Babylonian, the Egyptian, the Medes and the Persians. They're not associated with none of those calendars. Those calendars all hang on shadows and darkness. Yahuah's calendar is solely of light, his sun, his moon, and the stars. We see that the Passover is counted from the new moon. We can recognize that when we read in Leviticus chapter 23, where it talks about on the 14th day of this month Abib is Passover. On the 15th day of that month Abib is the beginning of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is also a high holy Sabbath, a seventh day Sabbath. We need to take our time and dissect and examine the scriptures for what they're exposing and revealing to us in these last days. Again, when we look at the memorial blowing of the trumpets, we can see that it is anchored to the days counting based upon the new moon, not upon any calendar that is hung upon man's wall. This is why Yahuah's Sabbaths will always fall on the 8th day, the 15th day, the 22nd day, and the 29th day of his months. Man's months has no part, no play, no say in Yahuah's system of counting. This is why David was able to speak this psalm, because he fully understood the constellations. He fully understood the sun and the moon. He fully understood the book of Enoch. He fully understood where Enoch spoke about the moon, the full moon being new moon. He understood where Genesis, the Most High had said in Genesis chapter 1, verse 14 to 18, what Yahuah had said about the luminaries, what their purposes were for. David understood these things. David was a man out in the open. He was constantly fighting to protect his sheep. And he would have been observing. He would have been observant of nature. As a result, he has written Psalms 81. And it says, "Sing aloud unto Elohim our strength. Make a joyful noise unto Elohim of Jacob. Take a psalm and bring hither the timbrel, the pleasant harp with the psaltery." Hear what he says now. "Blow up the trumpet in the new moon, in the time appointed on our solemn feast day. For this was a statute for Israel, a law of Elohim of Jacob. This he ordained in Joseph for a testimony when he went out through the land of Egypt, where I heard a language that I did not understand." So we can recognize that they would have understood when to blow the trumpets. The trumpet or the shofar would be blown on the day of the new moon, which will be the first day of the month. This is how this scripture is understood. In all of Yahuah's months, there are always Sabbaths, seventh-day Sabbaths. They do not interfere or set in array the other holy convocations or feast days. There's never any corruption. There's never any variances. They are always on the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, the 29th days of Yahuah's month. still always allowing for the proclamation of the feast days which are given to Israel in Leviticus chapter 23. So, what does a visual of Yahuah's month look like? Brother Jane or Brother Jean, Sister Kim or Sister Suzanne goes out and observes on a nightly basis how the moon looks, where the moon is at, where the stars are at. Morning hours comes and they observe where the stars are falling, where they are aligning with the moon and with the sun. And we recognize that when we see the full moon, we know then that this particular full moon is the beginning of, this particular full moon is new moon. This particular full moon is telling you that tomorrow begins new moon day. When we would have observed the sun and the moon facing each other on opposite horizons, we would have recognized that this is new moon day. Hence, this day is the beginning of any given month of Yahuah. Counting from the first day of the month, which is new moon day, we count 8 days. Within the first and the 8th day, we have 6 working days. The first day, new moon day, is not a work day. It is a worship day. After new moon day finishes, we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are the 6 work days. After those 6 work days is the 7th day Sabbath, which falls on the 8th day of Yahuah's month. Whether a feast is approaching, it does not and it will not be obstructed by the celebration of the Sabbath. This is what Yahuah's months look like from time past and now and into the future. Brothers and sisters, I hope that this lesson study has been of a great help. And as usual, if there are any corrections or any errors or any inconsistencies, please urgently, quickly point them out to me so that I too can get myself in order. Love to Yahuah, Yahushua, the Ruach HaKodesh, myself, my family, and my people, Israel. And any Gentile, any Goyim that wants to join himself to us in serving our true and living Ab Yahuah. Shalom, brethren.